of overtime that you get could be a little bit different here or there. So why do employers pay a higher rate for overtime work? So it says Jake Norris works at a local library. He works a regular 40-hour work week, shelving books at the library. His salary is $10 an hour. He makes $15 an hour when he works on Saturdays. Sometimes he would rather be out with his friends on Saturday, but he likes the extra pay. So, I mean, there's always that decision of like, okay, do I want my social life or do I want to make extra money? And depending on where you are in life, that opinion might change. So some employers, you have to work more than 40 hours to start earning overtime. Some employers, if you work on a weekend, you can earn overtime, even if you don't have more than 40 hours in the work week. Some employers but some employers pay you even more if you work like Sunday or on a holiday or something like that. So depending on how the company is set up, overtime pay could be a little bit different depending on where you're at. So when you work more than the regular number of hours, or when you work outside of the regular hours, you can earn overtime pay. The overtime rate called time and a half. So standard overtime is what's known as time and a half. Has anybody ever heard that phrase before, time and a half? No? Okay. It's a pretty common phrase when it comes to hourly rate. So if you're earning time and a half, that would be overtime, which means you earn 1.5 times your hourly rate or 1.5 times your hourly rate. Sometimes hourly rate can be paid at the rate of double time, which means you're earning twice your hourly rate. Sometimes if you work like on Sundays or holidays, so it says, yeah, right here, employers often pay double time for Sundays and holidays. To calculate your overtime pay, we've got a couple of different formulas that we're going to be using today. The first one is figuring out just the amount of money you make in overtime. And that would be your overtime rate multiplied by the number of overtime hours, kind of like your regular rate times the regular hours to get your straight time pay. That's what we talked about yesterday. So if you figure out your total pay, that would be the sum of your regular pay, your straight time pay, plus your overtime pay. So the straight time pay we talked about yesterday, that breaks down into salary times, or not salary, but hourly rate times number of hours worked. And then over here, we've got overtime rate times the number of overtime hours worked. And then you would add those two values together to get total pay. So both of these consist of multiplication. And then you add those two together once you're done with that. So we'll do a few examples and be done with this lesson. It's a pretty quick one. So Alan Moore is paid $8.20 an hour for a regular 40-hour work week as a restaurant host. His overtime rate is time and a half, his regular hourly rate. This week, he worked his 40 regular hours plus 10 hours of overtime. Find his straight time pay. So first of all, we're going to figure out the total pay. So figure out total pay. First thing we're going to do is figure out his straight time pay. So his hourly rate is $8.20. So that's going to be 8.2 multiplied by the number of hours worked at his regular rate, which is 40. So 8.2 times 40, what does that give us? $328. Yep. So his straight time pay, his regular hour money earned before taxes and deductions and all that is $328 for the week. Flip the page over. We are then going to figure out his overtime pay. So his overtime rate is his normal rate, $8.20 an hour, times what? What do we multiply his overtime rate by, or what do we multiply his regular rate by to get the overtime rate? Yeah, 1.5 or 1.5, yeah. So 8.2 times 1.5 times, how many hours of overtime did he work? 10, yeah, so times 10. So it's going to be 8.2 times 1.5 times 10, which is $123 of overtime pay. And if you want to figure out his overtime rate, just multiply those two numbers together first. So 8.2 times 1.5 is $12.30. So if you wanted to, you could do this. You could say, all right, that is 12.3 times 10, which is $123. So his overtime rate is $12.30 an hour. He worked 10 hours of overtime. He got $123 from that. So now we're going to take the straight time pay, which is $328, plus the overtime pay of $123, for a total pay of $451. And that's it. So basically, we're doing basically the same calculation twice, one for his straight time pay, the other one for his overtime pay, and then we're just adding those together. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes. I want you to work on problems 1 and 2. And then we'll move on to, I think, just one more type of example, and that's it. So another very short day of notes. We'll try out 1 and 2. What's the overtime rate for Josie? How much money does Josie make an hour for overtime? We got that. Yeah, $13.50 an hour. Good. So $9 an hour for regular pay, $13.50 for overtime because you multiply 9 times 1.5. All right, so the regular pay is going to be 9 times 40 plus the overtime pay of 13.5 times 6. So this is going to be what, $360 of regular pay, and then $81 of overtime pay. So we're looking at 441. Nice. There we go. Oftentimes I'll organize the problem just by writing out the rates first over here, and then just writing the problem out over here using those different rates. Okay, Ed Lang, he makes $11.50 an hour. He worked 36 regular hours and 7 hours at time and a half. Okay, so we're looking at regular rate of $11.50. What's the overtime rate? What is it? $17.25. Sounds good to me. So $17.25 for time and a half. So then we're going to go with the total. That's going to equal the regular rate of 11.5 times 36 plus his overtime rate, 17.25 times 7. So, what was how much did he make from his regular pay? 414, okay. How much did he make from his overtime? What's that? Yeah, $120.75. Good. 120.75. So his total pay was what? Yeah, 534.75. Nice. Cool. So that's what we got for calculating total pay between regular plus overtime. So pretty much the same thing as we saw yesterday. We just take two of those multiplications and just add them together. All right. Anybody need more time here before we turn the page? Do a couple more and then we'll call it a day. Cool. Flip it on over. So these ones are going to use a little bit of algebra, kind of like the ones that we had yesterday used a little bit of algebra. So let's check out our situation here. So Jessica Cooper, she's a receptionist at a hotel and conference center. She is paid $12.50 an hour for a regular 40-hour work week. Her overtime pay is 1.5 times her regular hourly rate. This past week, Jessica earned $612.50 in total pay. How many hours of overtime did she work? So this one definitely has a little bit more involved, but we'll be able to work it out just fine because we know that she doesn't get overtime unless she goes beyond her 40 hours of regular work. So no matter what, her straight time pay is going to be $12.50 times 40 because she definitely worked that many hours, plus however many more after that she needed. So it says, we've got our formula here. Total pay is equal to the straight time pay plus the overtime pay. It says let H equal the number of hours of overtime she worked. So we're going to substitute in H into our formula over here. So we're going to plug in the values that we know and then solve for the one that we don't, which is H. So this time we know the total pay. What was it? Yeah, 612.50 or 612.5 equals the straight time pay. Straight time pay is equal to 1250 times what? 40. All right, I'm going to put that in parentheses just to group the straight time pay together. And then over here with overtime pay, we need to know the overtime rate before we do this. So over here, I'm just going to write OT rate. How much does she make per hour for overtime? $18.75. Good. So here, 18.75, and then number of hours of overtime is going to be H. So that's the equation that we have to write. So we got to do a little bit of algebra to get this worked out. Let's multiply out her straight time pay and figure out how much money she made on straight time pay first. So 40 times 12.5. How much is that? $500. Good. So $500 and then plus 18.75 H. All right, we're solving for H. What do we do next? Yeah. Subtract 500. So on the right side, we got 18.75 H. And on the left side, what do we have? $112.50. Good. 112.5. Okay, last step. How do we get H by itself? There you go. Divide by 18.75. So 112.5 divided by 18.75 is what? So she worked how many hours of overtime? 6. There we go. It's hours of overtime for Jessica Cooper. Okay. I want you to try 3 and 4. And let's go with like 5 minutes on that one because these ones will take a little bit longer to set up and solve. Feel free to work with each other on these two problems as well. If you want to, run some things across each other, make sure you're doing these correctly. That's totally fine. But let's say 5 minutes. Then we'll check in at 11:07 and that'll be it. So number three, and then basically every problem, and I should probably have said this before, but almost every problem that we do in this class will be a word problem. They'll have a scenario to it. The math itself isn't always going to be super challenging, but you're going to have to pick out information and use that information because when it comes to math, things that actually apply in real life have a scenario, which means it's a word problem. So if you're anything like me, I get annoyed by having to always go back to the paragraph to find the numbers that I need. So that's why I just listed off everything over here that I'm going to need for the formula. We need the regular rate, we need the overtime rate, which is $17.70. We need the total pay, we need the regular hours, which is 40, and we need the overtime hours, which is what we're solving for. So that'll be H or X or whatever variable you want to use. So we're just going to use the total pay equals straight times pay plus overtime pay here. So somebody give me the initial equation. What are we going to write for our equation that's going to let us solve this? Okay, 6. Yep. Yep. Uh-huh. Good. And what goes after the 17.7? H or X or yeah, whatever variable you chose for that. So there we go. Cool. That is our equation. Writing the correct equation oftentimes is the most important part of the problem because solving an algebra equation, hopefully everybody's pretty comfortable with that. But writing the correct equation in a word problem is oftentimes the hardest part. Figuring out the information you need, placing it where it needs to go in a manner that will actually get you to the right answer. So if we're looking at the straight time pay, how much straight time pay was earned? Like within the regular 40 hours, how much money was earned? Yeah, 472. So that'll be plus 17.7 H. All right, so subtract 472 from both sides. By the way, when we do that, when we subtract that value, we're actually figuring out how much money was earned in overtime pay. So how much money was earned in overtime pay? What's the number over here? 141.6. So that means that Corey earned $141.60 from overtime pay alone. And we'll divide by 17.7. So how many hours would that be? 8. Yeah. So it's basically like an extra day of work, essentially. So 8 hours of overtime. And if you want to, you can just write 8 hours. That's fine. You don't have to write Corey worked 8 hours of overtime. 8 hours. All right. That's number 3. Any questions there? Cool. No, the next problem is going to set up similar to the previous one, but we're actually not figuring out how many hours of overtime was worked. We're trying to figure out what the straight time pay was. So let's see. Western Deli pays its couriers straight time for 36 hours a week. So that's the limit for regular pay. Once you go over 36 hours, you get double time. So this problem is going to set up a bit differently. Last week, Kevin Alvarez worked a total of 42 hours and had total pay of $545.28. What is his straight time pay? So let's see. Do we know his regular rate? No. Okay. So if we say regular rate, what would we call that then? If we don't know it. Any thoughts? Yeah. So what variable do we want to use? R, sure. R for rate. Okay. The OT rate. We don't know it, but we know its relation to the regular rate. So what should we write for OT rate? Yeah. Yeah, R times 2 or 2R. Good. Because it's double. Whatever the regular rate is, overtime rate is double that, so 2R. What else do we need? We need total pay, which we have. Total pay is 545.28. We don't have straight time pay. We don't have overtime pay. We do have hours though. So let's say regular hours. How many regular hours would he have worked? What's the maximum amount of regular hours he can work before he gets starting overtime? 36, yeah. So he definitely worked 36 hours of regular because the total hours worked was 42, which means he worked how many hours of overtime? 6. Good. All right, so we're using the same information that we used on the last problem. We're not given the same information. So we have to we're going to use the same equation, but we're just filling in different parts of that equation this time. So here we go. Total pay, 545.28 is equal to the straight time pay of his hourly rate, which we don't know, multiplied by the regular hours, which we do know. So that'll be, I guess we don't need parentheses here. That'll be 36R. So that doesn't need to be there. 36R plus. So that's the straight time pay there. What about overtime pay? What would we write for that? Yeah, 6 times 2R. Which, if we multiply those together, that would give us 12R. So we can say 545.28 equals 36R plus 12R. And we can actually add those together as well. If you remember combining like terms from algebra 1, if you have the same variable, you can add the numbers up front, the coefficients, you can add those together. What's 36 plus 12? 48. All right, so 545.28 is equal to 48R. So we're solving for R here, which is his regular hourly rate. So divide by 48. So what does R equal? Yeah, 1136. So we're saying his regular hourly rate is $11.36. What would his overtime rate be in that case? $22.72. All right. So the best way to figure out if we've done this correctly is just to go back and plug in 1136 here and 1136 here. Or if you want to, you could plug in 2272 instead of 2R. That would be fine as well. But if you type in, let's just do 36. Let's start off here. 36 times 1136. If we plug that in there, 36 times 1136, we're going to get 408.96. 408.96 right there. That would be the straight time pay, which, by the way, is the answer to the problem. But we're going to try to verify that everything is done correctly. So it's a good idea just to go ahead and figure out the overtime pay as well, which was 6 times 2272. And if we multiply that out, that's $136.32 of overtime pay. So 136.32 of overtime pay. And if we add those two together, that should equal exactly the total amount of pay, which is 545.28. So checks out just fine on my end. So our answer then is going to be the straight time pay, just the straight time pay. So we did a lot of work. We did some extra work, but that little bit of extra work is always a good way to verify that everything was done correctly, and we were able to prove that. So straight time pay was 408.96. That was the answer. Cool. That's all I got for you for the week. I'm going to go and get you your assignment to you. And then if you are not done with some certain things,